The eyes of the world are upon us, with our allies around the globe waiting and watching to see how and when the United States will respond to two of the most urgent international questions of our time: the murder of Vladimir Putin's most powerful political opponent, Alexei Navalny, and the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine just days away. The open question of will the United States send Ukraine the aid it needs to hold the line against Russia? The common denominator here, one man, Russian President Vladimir Putin. The dictator who our own disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president still has yet to condemn for the murder of Alexei Navalny. A short time ago, the Biden White House announced that they will impose major new sanctions to hold Putin and Russia accountable for Navalny's murder. But on Ukraine, aid that Ukraine so urgently needs, that our international allies are waiting to see if the United States delivers, and that the Biden White House is ready to give, that aid is being hamstrung by the rookie Speaker of the House and a newbie to the international stage, Republican Mike Johnson, who, it is worth noting, spent his long weekend marking President's Day at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. And make no mistake, while Speaker Johnson was kissing the proverbial ring at Mar-a-Lago, and while House Republicans are on what White House Communications Director Ben LaBolt called a, quote, early and undeserved vacation, the situation on the ground in Ukraine is deteriorating and deteriorating fast. Over the weekend, Ukraine suffered a blistering defeat with Russian forces capturing the key Ukrainian city of Avdiivka. And now we are getting word about what the dwindling ammunitions are doing to Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines. Here's NBC's own Richard Engel from eastern Ukraine.
I was just talking to soldiers out here in eastern Ukraine a few minutes ago, and they were telling me that the shortages of ammunition are now so extreme that they're counting bullets. They are rationing their artillery rounds. They're rationing their regular ammunition that they put into their rifles. They are not in a position right now to launch any new offensives, and they are not really in a position to hold the line.
Rationing bullets. And while you might think that kind of stark reporting from the front lines might snap Speaker Johnson out of his sycophantic stupor, so far there is no sign of that. But make no mistake, the world is watching and it is judging. CNN is reporting that, quote, Speaker Mike Johnson is facing international criticism over his lack of swift action on Ukraine aid, which is ratcheting up pressure to make a critical decision that will not only have massive implications for his rookie speakership, but also for Ukraine's ongoing war effort against Russia. Worth remembering that Johnson has only been on the job 4 months and lacks experience on the international stage. So far, Johnson has resisted calls to bring a Senate-passed aid package up for a quick vote, a move that would require Democratic support and almost certainly spark a revolt from his right flank. To say nothing of Donald Trump, who has injected himself into the debate, urging Republicans to oppose Ukraine funding. Privately, Johnson told Republicans during a closed-door meeting last week there is, quote, no rush to address the issue, with Congress since having left town for a nearly 2-week recess. No rush? I think our neighbors and allies around the world would beg to differ, Mr. Speaker. And that is where we start this hour with MSNBC columnist and contributor Charlie Sykes. Also with us, Daily Beast columnist and host of the Deep State Radio podcast, David Rothkopf. And with me at the table, former campaign manager for Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign, Jim Messina. Charlie, when we say the world is watching, you don't need to just take our word for it. Here's the Polish foreign minister at the Munich Security Conference.
It's much cheaper to help Ukraine now than it will be if Putin conquers Ukraine and then has to be deterred. We appeal to the House of Representatives, to Mike Johnson personally.
Speaker of the House, yeah.
To please let it go to a vote.
Do you believe it is damaging U.S. credibility?
Well, if Ukraine, having been encouraged to resist, the President of the United States having put his standard on the ground in Kiev, in the famous historic visit, then doesn't deliver on assistance, that would send a message around the globe that that you have to be careful, because the United States, for important but regrettable reasons, might not be able to come through for you.
Be careful, you mean trusting the United States in the future.
And that would have important implications, not only in Eastern Europe, but around the globe. The world is watching. This really is not only about Ukraine.
Charlie, this is much bigger than Ukraine. What do you think of when you hear that?
That we are walking into an international disaster. I mean, it's easy to get distracted by the dysfunctional buffoonery of this fifth-string speaker and the Republican Party in the House, but there are real-world consequences that are measured now in lost lives and in the possibility of an international catastrophe. Unfortunately, there's no known antidote for what you described as the sycophantic stupor that House GOP members find themselves in. As long as Donald Trump is issuing his orders to Mike Johnson, and Mike Johnson knows that his speakership hangs by a thread, it seems almost naive to expect any profile in courage or any sort of leadership despite, the acuteness of the crisis.
David, the news from Ukraine, it is bleak. You have the House on recess. Speaker Johnson has painted himself into a political corner. Here's how White House comms director Ben LaBolt puts it, quote, House Republicans are on vacation while their inaction does escalating damage to our national security. Russia just saw its most significant gains in Ukraine in nearly a year because Ukraine is running low on supplies and Congress has failed to pass critically needed support. Speaker Johnson and House Republicans must act. Time is of the essence. David, in other words, when we talk about this being bigger than Ukraine, it is also about our national security.
It very much is about our national security. The reality is, of course, this didn't just happen. The White House asked for this aid 4 months ago. The White House then said that at the end of the year, if it was not provided, it would begin to do damage. We've now seen the damage. You know, we may talk about the sycophantic stupor of Mike Johnson and his inexperience, but we know Mike Johnson has sat in briefings in which he was told that if this money was not provided, these things would happen to Ukraine. And of course, the context for all of this is last week, Donald Trump said that he would not defend NATO, that he didn't care what happened to NATO. He invited Russia to do, in his words, whatever the hell it wants with NATO. And so big damage to Ukraine, hopefully not irreversible damage, but also enormous damage to America's most important alliance and our standing in the world. And if we don't stop Russia, and if they move forward against NATO, what's the consequence? Well, we will have to, under the terms of the NATO agreement, send our troops there to defend Europe against Putin in a much more costly war than the one we're seeing right now in Ukraine.
Given those stakes, why is that not breaking through to congressional Republicans?
Because Donald Trump has control of that party. Yep. Because Donald Trump is the only leader in the Republican Party right now, and everyone else spends their time kissing his ring. And the political consequences be damned, and they continue to lose election after election following this guy down a rabbit hole in a variety of things: abortion, foreign policy, the environment, immigration, etc. But they don't seem to care because the only thing they're really worried about is their own primaries. And so Donald Trump continues to just run his party into the ground. Can
we pull up that picture of Mike Johnson at Mar-a-Lago? Because folks had quite a bit of fun with this. The fact, one, that he is under an exit sign, as though that is an omen. The Biden-Harris campaign posting this, quote, "The Speaker of the House meets with Mike Johnson." I mean, Jim, that gets to it right there, which is Mike Johnson is not really calling the shots here.
No, he's not. He's the fifth speaker we've had this year. A month ago or 2 months ago, you and I had never heard of him. Members of Congress had never heard of him. And now he has the smallest majority since World War II. They're losing seats almost every month here. They may be out of the majority before the election if it continues like this. And so the only person making decisions is Donald Trump. And he just has terrible political judgment on all of these things. We don't have a deal at the border because of Donald Trump. We don't have funding for Ukraine because of Donald Trump. And yet Mike Johnson just does whatever he's told to do.
Charlie, I want to read to you something conservative commentator Mark Levin had to say, quote, "Russia is gaining on Ukraine, which is running out of certain crucial weaponry and having to pull back from areas it had controlled and faces losing the war Russia started. Is that okay with everyone? Ukraine is a relatively small country without the capacity for a large industrial economy in which it can build the needed weapons. This is not theoretical. This is reality. NATO countries border Ukraine, and if Putin moves on any of them, then what? He has said in the past that he is eyeing Poland, Romania, and the Balkan states. This is a grave situation. When you have, Charlie, a conservative commentator like Mark Levin sounding the alarm, what I am reminded of is the fact that these GOP members of Congress, they're not even listening to people in the old echo chamber. They are now listening almost exclusively to one man.
Yes, and Mark Levin, although he is right there, of course, has been a dependable ally of Donald Trump, and only now to discover, hey, it is grave to go along with Vladimir Putin's leading cheerleader within the Republican Party. I mean, this is a grave situation. The international consequences are immense. But Jim is absolutely right. You have a House of Representatives led by an inexperienced leader with an almost invisible margin of error, who is not able to stand up to Donald Trump. And, even though this is bad political judgment, I think what is really alarming in the rest of the world is the prospect that this man might actually be the president of the United States. I mean, it is hard for Americans and our allies to get our heads around the possibility that the United States may elect one of Vladimir Putin's defenders and rationalizers, and that this would be the leader of the Republican Party. I mean, I just do think that we need to step back to emphasize how mind-bending this is, but also how grave the consequences are for the future of Europe and for NATO. This man could get back into office, handing Vladimir Putin a victory beyond his wildest expectations or dreams.